What is up, you muffin munching muggles? Welcome to Fiction and Reality. Which one of you is the Gnosia? Yes, today we're talking about one of the newest installments of the death game genre, Gnosia. There's something about this death game storytelling genre that just pulls many of us in. Perhaps it's the crazy psycho yandere girlfriend, the psychological horror of going face to face with your own moral dilemmas, or the thrill of giving your life to hunt for Dragooner balls, all for the chance to have your wish granted by a magic cup. Being cognizant of the fact that life is the ultimate price to pay, that is the core driving factor of these games. Let's look at Gnosia to see how its time loop spin and its dependence of social deduction sets it apart from other death games I've watched over the years, which all just happen to be anime.
I get it, I'm an anime fan as well, but this is when you have a real fucking problem.
Are you sure you're not the Gnosia? I saw you venting.
You fucking vented! Shut the fuck up!
Gnosia is the newest installment of the whodunit anime and adds its own unique spin on the death game genre using the space-time continuum, aka time looping. We'll be looking at some of the parts that comprise a death game to examine how Gnosia measures up with other death games I've watched. Every death game has its own set of rules, so let's break them down. Here's the premise of Gnosia. Gnosia follows a crew that boarded a drifting spaceship following an attack by a Gnosia, who are highly intelligent life forms that infect humans and mimic them down to a T. Thus, these life forms are able to blend in with the populace and take over other life forms without falling under suspicion. Facing off against this mysterious and deadly threat and having no idea who among them is really the enemy, the crew formulates a desperate plan for survival. The AI of the ship is programmed to self-destruct the vessel whenever it detects a Gnosia on board. However, a deal was struck to spare the lives of those on board. The most suspicious among them would be put into cryosleep, one by one, in an effort to rid the ship of the Gnosia. The rules of a death game trope all tend to center around sacrifice in some fashion or form. Knowing that the people who die are going to reemerge through the timeline does risk cheapening the stakes, but if executed in parallel with the progression of the story arc in mind-jarring deduction scenarios, it can amp up the stakes exponentially. Refreshing taste from having a crazy pink-headed psycho slicing everything in her path. Not saying I wouldn't want her defending me, I wouldn't want to go against her, but if I had that devil on my team, I would not fear staring into the abyss. I would not fear death.
I have seen the Magna Carta. I've seen the Eye of Horror.
Yuri, the protagonist of Gnosia, must correctly identify the Gnosia on board the ship before everyone is killed. However, even when all the Gnosia are identified, or if he is killed by the Gnosia, the time loop simply resets with him once more waking from a sleeping chamber. I'm curious about your opinion of this. Do you believe the time loop adds more intensity to the premise of Gnosia's death game or cheapens it? When we're dealing with the rules of a death game, typically the idea of one and done is what encompasses the core of the death game. In Gnosia, the primary objective is finding a way to break the loop and identifying the Gnosia before the protagonist or anyone else is killed and the loop resets. Thus, death is never truly caught in the shadow of finality. We know we're going to see the characters again. Gnosia's formula deviates from, say, a Future Diary where there are 12 diary holders who must kill each other until only one remains. The lone survival is then granted the abilities and powers of a god. It's the old battle royale shtick, which in this case carries you from chemical terrorist toddlers all the way toward getting a little poke of hepatitis C to the peepers. Or we could take something more philosophically anchored like Death Parade, which tests the bounds of human morality at the extremes, where the souls of the dead must partake in a game designed to draw out the truest nature of their spirit, and unearth the darkest blights nesting within. A Jerry Springer bonanza where even after death you can say, "It's not my child!" The story of Gnosia is still unfolding, but one might find that the stakes stray from that knife to the throat sensation experience from other mediums of death games. Simply because you know that the character is incapable of dying for good. As of now, the story is still unfolding. At the core of Gnosia lies the element present in all good storytelling, that one facet which keeps the audience coming back for more, and that is the unknown. Whereas we know the end game of Future Diaries is going to result in a survivor, having been told that only one person can become the god of the timeline inherently, meaning that everyone except one diary holder must die. And in Death Parade, where the predetermined outcome is either your soul is getting sent to heaven or hell after the purity of your soul is weighed, Gnosia feeds on the shadows, calling the audience to invest in uncovering what the Gnosia truly are, why only a few characters within the loop carry forward memories from loop to loop, and why some characters present in one timeline of the ship fail to board the vessel in another. It's an intriguing approach toward the marker of finality that's usually practiced in the death game genre. From where we are in the story, I find that the rules of Gnosia's death game tread lightly on the jet streams of a terminal endgame, though of course the plot may take an unforeseeable turn that dispels all of this. The combination of the whodunit atmosphere and Deathloop makes for a sweet cocktail of death and delight as the audience seeks to uncover the truth behind its world. All the anime that I've watched in the death game genre tend to have an end game in mind, which, surprise, surprise, tends to end in death, or with the crazy, murderous, psycho, time-traveling yandere, blitzkrieging timelines, or some high-level hand-to-hand combat over an over-glorified cup that grants your Dragon Gooner Ball wishes. Either way, there's an endgame.
We're in the endgame now.
While Gnosia enacts its own unique renditions of the death game genre, and keep in mind that the story is living and still unfolding, so this might change, its end objective becomes somewhat foggy and cryptic when we factor in the time loop aspect of the story. We know that in every episode the goal is to shatter this loop while simultaneously eliminating the Gnosia by putting them into a cold sleep. Gnosia does something wonderful within itself by blending the death game with social deduction, meaning we know, or at least can infer in the present, that the story is unlikely to end with one sole survivor. The integration of social deduction and time traversal delineates Gnosia from the commonplace trope one may trace in the basic tread of the death games genre, the long-standing axiom of being the last survivor, the last one standing amongst a field of bludgeoned corpses, anointed for having endured the death parade, and rewarded with the opportunity to claim the prize lying in wait, which may or may not have been what it seemed beforehand. It tends to end with the character reflecting on if the choices they made were the right one. Reflect on if the choices they made to kill others was worth the reward in the end. The characters in Fate Zero throw out the fisticuffs to secure their wish for the Holy Grail, eliminating one another until they are the sole survivors. Saber sets her sword to Wumbo and screams like a grocery store Karen, chopped some people to bits to all pursue the Holy Grail and avert the tragedies that brought ruin to her kingdom in the past. This differs from Gnosia, which veers on the side of moral reflection and introspection of humanistic qualities and characters, shading the gray between the black and white. Every death game funnels toward its story's core messaging while reeling toward the resolution. Will Gnosia maintain that continuity? What exactly is the thematic core of Gnosia anyway? Perhaps we'll be taking a look into what it truly means to be human, as we saw in the latest episode, where the Gnosia, at least in pointed timelines, are locked into some internal conflict, reflecting on the moral dilemma of what it means to be humans and what it means to be Gnosia. And if the Gnosia would have been treated differently because it was a Gnosia, or rather why it wasn't treated differently. Future Diary has Yuki and Yuno's love transcending death and time itself. That's sort of the overall encompassing message. Love transcends death and morality. It's one reason why we see Yuki break from his pacifist shell and start deleting people in Future Diary, turning on his closest allies and friends all in order to survive and eventually to protect Yuno as he develops a genuine bond with her through heavy reliance of her combat prowess to protect him during the survival game. We haven't seen an overarching concept reinforcing the prominence of the actions taken within Gnosia, meaning the overall theme of Gnosia has yet to surface, but it has suggested we'll be exploring what makes a human human. We are aware, however, that in Gnosia, conflict is more psychological than physical, due to the persistent angst and anxiety experienced by Yuri while constantly falling under suspicion of any and everyone on the crew, while the harbinger of death prepares to strike should the choice he makes be the wrong one. To some degree, death loops can taper the gravity of morality and thus the weight and meaning of a character's death and relationships with other characters, especially when those ties are left drifting into the void. The interesting thing about Gnosia is that knowledge across loops appear to be able to get stored in a key that both Yuri and Setsu share independently of one another, but can cross-link to establish the pattern of events in different timelines. With the integration of the time loop, suddenly things like betrayal, which we see in Mirai Nikki or Future Diaries for the non-weebs out there, become par for the course as the protagonist simply can traverse another loop and rebuild the connection by traversing an entirely different pathway. Speaking of betrayals, at least Yuki apologized before sicking his murderous pink-haired yandere on them. Not sure the person heard it though. Thus, a lot of the core messaging within Gnosia risks getting trapped in stasis or being washed away into the flux of time. From the last few episodes, we are aware that Setsu is cognizant of the loop and can exchange information using both her and Yuri's time key devices, thus carrying parcels of their memory forward through different timelines. We also discovered that the Gnosia are aware of this time loop as well. This restricts Yuri from truly building sincere relationships with other members of the crew. Thus, when crew members die, the audience doesn't really feel a dramatic shift in the plot. That is because the death within Gnosia is simply a fixed paradigm or pattern. The audience knows how the Gnosia will kill the crew members every loop. As before warping to vote, crew members within the loop will die. The spin is that the Gnosia can change hosts every timeline or reside in the same individual, meaning that no one can truly be trusted, and everyone who appears to have Yuri's best interest in mind could be a wolf in sheep's clothing. As of now, the time loop in Gnosia is acting as a double-edged sword. At the core of what makes Gnosia unique is its implementation of social deduction and the traversal of time loops, exponentially hardening the architecture of the whodunit sphere by continuously randomly assigning the killer. At the same time, however, the time loop risks fraying the emotional bonds that the audience forged between the characters, putting the core connection in danger of withering and wilting away, since there really hasn't been anything to show us that the lives can be lost forever. Those who experience death games invest more time when there is actual meaning behind the character's death, which usually walks hand in hand with the finality of death, which is a concept that Gnosia is stepping outside the box of, which is both risky, daring, and intriguing enough to pull the audience along for the ride and encourage them to stay and discover the secrets behind the Gnosia life forms and the time loop itself. The true thematic meaning of Gnosia still needs to be discovered, but from tracking its course, I predict it will seek to unfurl what differentiates a human from a monster, or if both are perhaps all one and the same. It will likely come to take the form of something of a human morality-driven theme, such as what's found in Death Parade. I can't see Gnosia going as deep as to Greenlight, a Shaolin showdown at a billiards bar, or having someone hit-stick their grandpa through a fish tank. But just for the sake of finding an example and picking up hints from the latest episode of Gnosia, we're likely heading somewhere in that direction. Most death games tend to be concentric around a battle royale type beat. There's one golden ticket at the end of the railroad, and the only way for you to obtain it is to off everyone else who chooses to stand in your way. Gnosia leans more on drawing on context clues from the crew members and deducing who the mole is from assessing speech slip-ups and catching the crew members in contradictions. Whoever raises the most suspicion gets put into a cold sleep if they acquire the majority of votes from the crew. It's interesting because the crew members in Gnosia are not necessarily trying to preemptively kill each other per se, but they are trying to survive being killed by the infected Gnosia on board, and deduction is what the series uses to displace the commonplace killer instinct. The characters in Gnosia aren't extremely visceral to one another like you might observe in other death games like the Future Diaries or Fate Zero, but they sure as hell don't trust each other, especially this Rockio guy or girl or whatever he is. In the typical death game, you know the set of players at hand and come to understand what abilities they have in their arsenal. Future Diaries, for example, has 12 diary holders, each with their own set of unique abilities we become introduced to, and Fate Zero has its 7 master and servant pairs to rip toward the Holy Grail. The goal in both of the preceding series is to be the last person left breathing on the battlefield, following the complete termination of your opposition. Gnosia, however, leaning on the art of deduction, changes the characters who are on the ship relative to the timeline in play. Some of the crew members who are on the ship in other timelines won't appear in another timeline, for example. This throws the audience off the scent of the killer and makes it sort of arduous and hard for the protagonist to sniff out the mole. Plus, we get the exciting opportunity to find out what the new characters introduced do and who they are, such as this Cat Slinky character we've yet to see. How the hell is he doing that? And is that a dolphin? And if you didn't think that made it bad enough, in some timelines there are 2 rather than just 1 Gnosia on board the ship. The most enticing thing about Gnosia is that it doesn't reveal everything all at once. We don't even truly understand what the Gnosia are, but we are versed well enough to know that they infect other humans. If there's nothing else you remember, is that leveraging the unknown is what pulls the audience in. Death games have to strike fast with the hook and ensnare the audience within its world quickly, or else risk being cast into the other pit of bloody battle royale death games. The masses of consumers are always looking for that one peculiarity when it comes to the death game genre, and Gnosia meshes into that mold with its deduction and time loop approach. Pocketing the unknown and poking the audience with vague hints, it features yet another crack in the window of its world for the audience to slip into and explore. Ultimately, I can't wait to see some of the theories that arise from this show regarding the characters, the Gnosia, and the time loop entrapping the crew members in the Gnosia as well. Gnosia is an anomaly amongst the death game trope, and while its infrastructure varies vastly from the standard formula, which may pose risks in the audience attaching to its characters or finding meaning in the deaths throughout the show, it's also a show with enough potential to command your attention. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Gnosia and how it pairs with other death games in the genre. Comment below your favorite death game, anime, movie, or TV show. Drop some recommendations. If you want more analysis of your favorite characters or fictional worlds, go ahead and smash that like button, turn on that notification bell, and subscribe for more. This channel is ever evolving and will continue to grow to appeal to the audience at large. Remember that the direction of progress is forward and it's only up from here. And with that, remember, if you're ever lost in the forestry of words, strip your mind from fantasy and look to the window of the world. And there your mind will run free.